So we are here to, we're just hosting this user group to show you what we've been working on in terms of the latest release of Deltanji, which is very exciting because we're going to be showing you the updates to the user interface and the user experience, which will make Deltanji a lot more easier to use. So we hope you find that. And also some changes to, or the updates to the task server too. And then, so George is going to do that section, and then John is going to do a preview of some new features to the VS Code Deltanji extension for those that are working in VS Code or looking to work in VS Code. You'll probably find that quite interesting. So I'm just going to tell you what else we've been working on very briefly. So we've been doing a lot of work in VS Code. As you probably know, we are running a number of training courses that are available to users of InterSystems Studio that are looking to migrate over to VS Code. We've got a number of different courses based on how much help you need with migrating and what level of experience you've got with VS Code. So if you're completely new, you haven't even opened it, downloaded it, we can help you with that. Or if you've got a bit more experience, then we have something that will sort of show you how you can go beyond using VS Code as a straightforward replacement for Studio. So you can have a look on our website. We've got much more detailed information on there about our courses. Then we've also been working on we're working as maintainers of the VS Code extension SQL tools, and that allows users to connect to different databases, including InterSystems IRIS, and it makes it super straightforward and easy to do. All you have to do if you want to find out more about that, have a little play around with it, is search for SQL tools in the VS Code extension panel, and you'll find it there. And finally, we just wanted to sort of make note of this milestone. We contribute monthly to VS Code itself, and as of this month, John has made over 130 contributions, so that's very exciting. It's really great, and that helps us to stay up to date with the latest features. So that's just a little nice celebration. Okay, so I'm going to hand you over to George, who is going to show you all about Deltanji 8.
Okay, thank you, Laurel. Okay, what I'd like to do, I'm very excited about this, is to start off by showing you what the current architecture of Deltanji looks like. This diagram summarizes that architecture fairly nicely. You'll see at the bottom we have a row of component drivers. Going from left to right, you've got regular files, which are things like HTML files and JavaScript and anything else that you find on your file system. And then moving from the left to the right, we've got IRIS classes, routines, lookup tables, schemas, production configuration items, and actually many, many more. We have about a library of about 50 different component drivers that all plug into Deltanji to manage different things. If you're using something like Git, then all you get to work with is files on the file system. So you're looking at that box on the left. Everything else to the right of that are things that Deltanji does that Git and GitHub are unable to do. So that's the value add of Deltanji. So above the line, we've got client integrations, and these are the ways that you can interact with Deltanji. So the first one on the list here is the Deltanji portal. In previous versions of Deltanji, we used to refer to this as the browser user interface or browser UI, or so a bit of it, which was always a bit of a mouthful. So we figured it's high time we gave it a proper name, and actually ranked it up there along with all our other client integrations as ways of interoperating with Deltanji or interacting with Deltanji. So Deltanji Portal is the new name for the browser user interface, and I'll be showing you more of that in a moment. Our other client integrations, in no particular order, are VS Code, which is where most of you should be spending time if you're editing, or Studio if you haven't yet migrated from Studio to VS Code. And then over on the right-hand side, we have a couple of integrations, one to the IRIS management portal for managing things like lookup tables, and then one to the production configuration page for managing configuration items within Deltanji. So with that kind of orientation, that gives you an idea of Deltanji, of the Deltanji architecture. What I'd now like to do is to switch over to the Deltanji portal and just show you the look and feel of our new browser interface. So first of all, we've got a nice, clean, fresh login page, and that takes us into the portal. And what we've tried to achieve here, I think the brief was a clean, uncluttered look that's elegant, refined. So I'll let you be the judge of whether or not we've achieved that, but I'm fairly happy that we've achieved something like that. It's certainly a screen that I spent a lot of time in front of, and I haven't yet started to hate it. So that's good. So the first thing that you'll notice on here is that over on the left-hand side, the folders down here are pretty similar to what was in Deltanji 7, except that the setup folder has now been split into 3 sections. We've separated out security-related options and customization options. So in the setup folder, you'll see that we have transfer routes and locations and those kind of things that you'll normally use for doing for configuring workflow and so on. So that's all that you find in the setup folder. Security now contains access control on functions and menus, and it also contains definition of users and roles. So if we click on users and go and look at these and open up one of these, you'll get to see what forms look like within the new UI, which I think you'll find is also cleaner and a little bit more modern looking. While we're in this screen, it's worth noting that access rights have now been renamed as roles. So we now have new terminology in 1 or 2 places, and this is one of those places where we refer to roles rather than access rights. So it's a better description of what function they perform. You'll also notice there's a couple of new fields in here for allowing users to provide their email address and subscribe to our mailing list. And that's part of an effort for us to connect more closely with our actual end users. I think we have good relationships with most of our customers at the system manager and Deltanji system manager kind of level, but we don't have much good contact. We don't communicate well with the actual developers who are using Deltanji on a day-to-day basis. So this is a way for them to subscribe to our mailing list and keep up to date and informed about what's going on with Deltanji. So that's something that's gives you an idea of the what forms look like and some of the changes we've been making to forms. So that's in the security folder, and then the customization folder contains all those things that used to be in the setup folder but are actually not used very frequently, typically only used when you're first setting up Deltanji, or if you're reconfiguring it and changing its core behavior in some way. So those now fit under a separate customization section. And that those changes help to manage who has access to which of those folders and so on, and make it easier to control that aspect of access security. So let's drill into some locations, which is where most people spend most of the time. So we've got three location lists here: one for developers, one for quality control, one for release management. And if we look in the developer folder, you'll see that there's three locations in here. There's a development sandbox, and then there's a couple of test locations. So drilling into the sandbox, we've got the familiar three subfolders for objects, change requests, and components. I'm just going to select components and switch over to this. So one of the big changes that we've done to the visual language in Deltanji is to revise the icons that are used, make them simpler. They were becoming very fussy, and there were very many variations for different things that were confusing rather than providing clarity. So here, what we've focused on is clear representations of each type of thing within Deltanji. So objects are now represented by a square, change requests by a diamond, and components by a hexagon. And you'll see here, when we're looking at the component view, that each component is represented by a hexagon. The decorations on the hexagon and the coloring indicate the state of that component. So white represents an unregistered component. Amber represents a component that's been registered, and green, you've probably guessed it, represents a component that's been checked out. So those are the kind of states that you'll get to see for components. Similarly, for change requests, we've got diamonds that represent a change request, and green represents checked out, and so on. We've also retained the filters at the top, and if you only want to view checked out items, for example, you can deselect that button and you'll just get the checked out ones. So we selected that. And then over on the object view, we've got the view that I think most people tend to use from day to day, which is a fairly flat view of the items within the location. So let's look at this guy here. This is a configuration item for a production class called FAA.main, and I want to just run through a change to this configuration item, which will show you the kind of way that we might interoperate with this. So first of all, let's go over to our development server. RedDev is a namespace on our development server, which is a separate IRIS instance. And so we'll log into that. And what you'll see is we've got a production here that's running, and there's an operation in here called email alert. And if I select that, you'll see that there's an amber icon here, which indicates that it's a registered component within Deltanji, but it's not checked out. Because it's not checked out, these properties are read-only, and you'll see that they're grayed out because you're unable to change those items. So I can try, but I can't type into the comment field here. So if I want to change this, then I can click on this button here, and that will pop up the Deltanji transfer screen, and I can select a change request and perform a checkout. So now you'll see that that icon has gone green, and this item has got a green background to it to indicate that it's checked out. And you'll see now that it's editable. So I can do something in here. Maybe add a comment like that and apply that change. The production updates, and we've now got a change in our development environment, in our development sandbox. So now we want to get this over into our test environment, and I can do that by invoking the check-in, and I can do that either from here. So we're going to do a check-in from red dev to ready for test, but I'm not going to do it from here. I'm going to switch back to the Deltanji portal. Just refresh the item here. You can see that it's green, which means it's checked out, and double clicking there, and I can select a check-in, and it will do a check-in. So one of the ease of use things that we've changed there is to allow a double click on an item to invoke the transfer screen. Previously, it used to invoke a detailed screen, which was normally not what you wanted to do. So now we've checked that item in, it's over in our ready for test folder. And if we go into the QC list, this would normally be a different user that would go in and look at this. So this is a different user's view of things. And in here, we'll see that there's a few things queued up for testing, but we can pick the email alert, which is the one that we want to test, and we can drop it into red test, which is our test environment, and that's now ready for testing. That's now, sorry, not ready for testing. That's now in testing. So, and if we go look in here, we'll see that that's in a state of being in test. And at this point, after the testing is completed, the user can then decide whether or not it's passed or failed. Let's pass this one. I don't think we broke anything. And so we have a choice here of pass or fail is the other option. And if you fail with this workflow, if you fail it, then it sends it back to the developer for rework. So we'll pass that, and that then puts it into the staging location. So if we drill down into the staging folder, then we'll see that it's queued up there, and we can then drop that. We can deploy that from staging into our production environment. So that's given you an idea of the typical kind of workflow that we would do with Deltanji, and shown off some of the changes to the user interface as we've gone through that. So what I like to do now is to change tax slightly and talk about the task server. one of the changes in Deltanji 8 is the introduction of Task Server 2. So this is a graphic that shows Task Server 1, and what the key feature of this diagram highlights is that when setting up Task Server 1, you need to set up an ECP connection in both directions, from the main node to each remote node, and from each remote node to the main node. The biggest change and the motivation for developing Task Server 2 was to simplify that a little bit. We now only need an ECP connection in one direction, and that's from the remote node to the main node. So immediately that makes configuration simpler. There's half as many ECP connections that need to be set up. There's half as much memory consumed in supporting those connections, and half as many things to review when something doesn't work. So that's the motivation behind Task Server 2. It's simpler to set up and easier to support. Because a lot of you have got Task Server 1 running nicely and you're quite happy with it, we're continuing to support Task Server 1, and Task Server 2 can run on nodes alongside Task Server 1. So you can have a mix of nodes, some of which are Task Server 2 and some of which are Task Server 1. And as you add new nodes to your configurations, then it would make sense to use Task Server 2 if you can. And then over time, you may want to migrate some of your old Task Server 1 instances over to 2. But there's no pressure or requirement to do that in any near short-term timescales or even mid-term timescales. So that's what I wanted to say about Task Server 2. If I just switch back to the Deltanji portal and go and look at security, then there's an additional option in here displaying remote nodes. And this is one of the things that with Task Server 2 is it allows you to have greater visibility from the main Deltanji node of what state your remote nodes are in. And this display shows that we've got 4 Task Server 2 instances connected or configured, 3 of which are connected and online. This guy was connected once some time ago, but is currently offline, and the reason it's offline is that that machine is switched off. And you can see that the message counter hasn't actually been on very much. It's whereas these other nodes have been fairly active with lots of messages. And this screen also allows you to specify which Deltanji nodes are allowed to send messages to each remote node. So each remote node has an additional layer of security in that it will only perform tasks that are properly signed by a node that it trusts. So in this case, all of these 3 nodes trust IRIS 1913, which is the main Deltanji node. And they will not accept Task Server requests from any other instance because they've not been set up to trust. But if we wanted to allow this Task Server to trust a different node, for example, suppose we want to be able to send messages from the test environment to from the development environment to the test environment, then we could say that we trust that node, check that box, and then we know we're basically giving permission to the development node to accept messages from the test node, or vice versa, actually vice versa. So this just gives you an idea of what things look like when you're using Task Server 2. As I say, you can carry on using Task Server 1 indefinitely, and you can configure Task Server 2 alongside it and use a mix and match approach if you wish. So finally, I just want to mention that we've also extended the refresh to our documentation, and so we now have documentation pages that I think also reflect the new styling of the Deltanji portal. And if you want to know more about Deltanji 8, then go to the documentation, which is available now from a link on our website, and go to installation and then upgrade guide, and you can select on the Deltanji 8 release notes, and there's more information in there about everything that is new in Deltanji 8. So I hope that's given you an idea of what's new in Deltanji 8, and if I now hand over to John, then he's going to show you some things that are in the pipeline on the VS Code Deltanji extension side of things. So at the beginning of the meeting, John was incommunicado. He had some kind of network issues, but are you there, John?
I am indeed, and I hope it's going to stay that way. Let's see. Apologies if my connection does drop out. There seems to be something flaky on my connection today, but I'll do what we can. Yeah, so I'm going to spend a few minutes showing you the Deltanji extension for VS Code, which maybe some of you are already using. If you're migrating away from using Studio as your editor and instead using VS Code, then for best experience with Deltanji, you will also install the Deltanji VS Code extension, which is available from the marketplace. Just search for Deltanji and install it. Setup is fairly simple, but you can always contact us on support if you need a hand. What I'd like to show you here is using that extension but with a particular emphasis on a couple of new features that will only be available if your server side is on Deltanji 8, attentive to update your servers to Deltanji 8. So when you're working with VS Code on a Deltanji enabled namespace and you open up a class, in this case, it's a fairly simple class from a demo from InterSystems Learning. Messages appear in a Deltanji channel on the output panel, confirming that you're connected, who you're connected as, what you're connected to, and then reports the status of the file that you've opened up. So in this case, the class is currently checked out on a particular change request by a particular user today to this location. and available to check out and check in operations, and transfer and cancel version are available in the context menu of the file once you've opened the file up here. When you're doing your editing, VS Code provides what it calls quick diff markers. So Deltanji is telling VS Code what the previous version of this component looked like, and VS Code is then saying, well, I'll then highlight changes you've made. So these are added lines. This is a section of changed lines. You know, if I come and start putting a comment in on the end of this one, you notice that the change bar appears in at this very point. Anyway, the two new things that are coming in the next version of this extension, as long as you have Deltanji 8, relate to a VS Code feature called the Deltanji now is capable of feeding information onto the timeline of the VS Code editor. And we're currently using the timeline two different ways. One is to show the version history of this. So I'm currently working on version 2 of this class, and I'm doing it on this particular change request. But the timeline lets me see what the predecessor version was and what change request created that predecessor version, and similarly on the version before that. As well as being able to see the history here, you can do a comparison. So for example, I want to see how much version 2 is differing from version 0. I can click on that, and then in VS Code, I'll just give us a bit more space to see it. We get to use the VS Code side-by-side diff presentation. Left-hand side, version 0, right-hand side, the current version, where I've been adding some more stuff. The second thing we're doing with the timeline is to display on the timeline the audit version, the audit log information. So if I open up here and ask the timeline to show the audit messages for the current version, this version 2 was added to the change request and then checked out. If I want to see the audit log for all versions, that's only a click away. And now I can scroll my way down to the beginning of time as far as this object was concerned. So a year ago, on the 20th of February, it was created. Various things happened on version 0, and then at this point version 1 came in. Nice thing about timeline is that you can choose to have both sets of information in at the same place. So here is the appearance of the arrival of version 1 in the timeline sequence. That's when version 0 came into existence. Here's version 2, and these are the things that we've done since version 2 got created. Anyway, I think that's probably enough talking, and I've taken enough risks with my connectivity, so I'll quit while I'm ahead, stop the share, and I think I'll hand back at this point to Laurel.
So yeah, just want to say thank you very much everyone for your time and for joining us. If you want to upgrade to Deltanji 8 and you haven't already, then email us at support, and we'll get it packaged up and sent over to you.